The man asking about local business records seemed ordinary enough. Polite accent, expensive suit, legitimate questions about historical property documents. But something about the way he photographed library cards, the specific microfiche he requested, and the pattern of his visits over 3 weeks made Eleanor Price suspicious. Not librarian suspicious. Intelligence analyst suspicious. Because before Eleanor had spent 12 years organizing books at the Rockbridge County Library in Lexington, Virginia, she'd spent 18 years analyzing foreign intelligence for the CIA. And the man she'd been casually observing while stamping due dates and shelving mysteries wasn't researching local history. He was mapping government installations near the Virginia Military Institute. The question wasn't whether to report him. The question was whether to stop him before he transmitted what he'd gathered. At 63, Eleanor Price was supposed to be retired from the intelligence game. But some instincts don't retire. They just wait for the right threat to reactivate them. Welcome to Life Stories Archive, where the quiet professionals never really stop working. Rockbridge County Library sat 3 blocks from the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, a town where military history wasn't just studied, it was lived. VMI cadets used the library for research, local veterans gathered for book clubs, and families browsed the children's section on Saturday mornings. Eleanor Price had been the head librarian since 2016. She'd moved to Lexington after her retirement from government service, drawn by the town's quiet charm and its connection to military heritage. The job was perfect, intellectual without being stressful, social without being demanding, purposeful without being all-consuming. She wore reading glasses on a chain, cardigans regardless of season, and sensible shoes that didn't make noise on the library's hardwood floors. Her gray hair was cut in a practical bob. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a kindly librarian who helped people find books and hosted the Thursday afternoon knitting circle. The regulars loved her. Miss Eleanor always knows exactly which book you'll like, they'd say. What they didn't know was that her ability to read people and predict behavior came from years of analyzing intelligence patterns, assessing threats, and building psychological profiles of foreign operatives. The man first appeared on March 3rd. He signed in as Michael Sterling Richmond and requested access to historical property records from the 1950s. Nothing unusual. Researchers came through regularly, studying local history. But Eleanor noticed things. The way his eyes scanned the room before he sat down, checking exits and sight lines. How he positioned himself with his back to the wall, clear view of the entrance. The expensive watch that didn't match his claim of being a graduate student. Small details that individually meant nothing but collectively formed a pattern. Over 3 weeks, he returned 6 times. Always courteous, always with plausible research requests. But Eleanor tracked what he was actually examining. Property maps near VMI, utility infrastructure documents, historical photos, showing building layouts that hadn't changed much in 70 years. She did what any good librarian would do. She helped him find exactly what he requested. And she did what any good intelligence analyst would do. She documented every single thing he looked at, cross-referenced it with current installations, and started building a profile. His accent had inconsistencies. His backstory had gaps. And the questions he asked about VMI's current operations were too specific for someone supposedly researching 1950s architecture. Eleanor had been out of the game since 2014, But the methodologies didn't change. Pattern recognition, behavioral analysis, threat assessment. These weren't skills that atrophied with retirement. She used her home computer to access open source intelligence, the kind any citizen could find, but few knew how to analyze properly. She cross-referenced Sterling's appearance with facial recognition tools available to the public. She examined the metadata on documents he'd photographed. What she found was troubling. Michael Sterling appeared in Richmond property records, but his background was suspiciously clean. No social media presence, no digital footprint beyond the minimum necessary to establish identity. In intelligence work, someone that invisible wasn't an ordinary citizen. They were a carefully constructed cover. More concerning were the documents he'd been studying. Overlaid on a current map, they created a comprehensive picture of VMI's infrastructure, utility access points, and security blind spots. Not the kind of information needed for historical research, the kind needed for planning operations. Eleanor faced a decision. Contact the authorities with suspicions that might be nothing, potentially embarrassing herself and the library. Or trust instincts honed over 18 years of keeping America safe from threats most citizens never knew existed. She'd been trained to trust patterns over comfort. On March 24th, Sterling returned for what Eleanor suspected would be his final visit. He'd gathered enough information. Today he was completing his reconnaissance, likely photographing final documents before leaving Lexington. Eleanor waited until he was deep in the archives section, away from other patrons. She approached with her usual librarian demeanor, carrying a book on Virginia military history. "Mr. Sterling, I thought you might find this helpful for your research." He looked up, smile professional, but not quite reaching his eyes. "Thank you, but I'm actually finishing up today." Eleanor set the book down carefully. "Of course. Though I am curious. Your research on 1950s infrastructure has been quite thorough. Are you planning to publish your findings?" Something shifted in his expression, a calculation happening behind careful eyes. "Just a dissertation chapter. Nothing exciting." "I see." Eleanor removed her reading glasses, cleaning them with her cardigan, a gesture she'd used 1,000 times in the library, but her tone changed subtly. "It's interesting how your research patterns match threat assessment protocols. Very systematic, almost professionally systematic." Sterling's smile vanished. "I'm sorry?" "The way you photograph library cards to track your own research visits. How you position yourself with clear exits. Your interest in current VMI operations, despite claiming to study historical architecture." Eleanor's voice remained conversational, but her words carried weight. "I spent 18 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, Mr. Sterling. 12 of those analyzing foreign intelligence operations. I know reconnaissance when I see it." The silence stretched between them, two professionals recognizing each other across a library archive that suddenly felt very small. Sterling's posture shifted, less graduate student, more something harder. "That's quite an accusation from a librarian." "It's quite a reconnaissance operation for a graduate student." Eleanor didn't move, didn't raise her voice. "I've documented every document you've accessed, cross-referenced your research pattern with current installations, and built a fairly comprehensive profile of what you're actually studying here. And you're telling me this because you're going to leave Lexington today? You're going to abandon whatever operation brought you here. And you're going to know that this town has people watching. even the ones shelving books and hosting knitting circles. Sterling studied her for a long moment. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove it in court. I need to prevent it from happening. Eleanor pulled a sealed envelope from her cardigan pocket. Inside this envelope is every document you accessed, every photograph you took, every gap in your cover story, and a complete analysis of what those patterns suggest. It's addressed to the FBI's Richmond field office, currently sitting in my desk drawer. She set the envelope on the table between them. But if you leave Lexington today, and I never see you here again, maybe that envelope stays in the drawer. Maybe I chalk this up to an overly suspicious retired analyst seeing threats that don't exist. Sterling was gone within an hour. Eleanor watched from the library's front window as he loaded his car and drove north on Route 11, not looking back. She made the call anyway. Not to the FBI directly, she no longer had those contacts, but to a former colleague who still worked in counterintelligence. Someone who knew her reputation and would take her concerns seriously. Eleanor, you've been retired for 10 years. Are you sure about this? I'm sure about the patterns, James. I'm sure about his behavior. And I'm sure that if he wasn't a threat, he would have stayed and proved me wrong instead of disappearing the moment I challenged him. The investigation that followed was quiet, classified, and confirmed Eleanor's assessment. Michael Sterling was an operative for a foreign intelligence service conducting reconnaissance on U.S. military installations. Eleanor's intervention had disrupted an operation that could have compromised security at VMI and other military sites. The FBI's Richmond office sent an agent to thank her personally. Ma'am, how did you identify him when he'd passed background checks at 3 other institutions? Eleanor was shelving books, back to her normal routine. Because background checks look for criminal records and red flags. I was looking for behavior patterns. Those don't show up in databases. The CIA sent a letter, unclassified, suitable for framing if she wanted, thanking her for her continued service to national security. The director personally noted that vigilance doesn't retire when professionals do. Eleanor kept the letter in her desk drawer, filed under miscellaneous correspondence. She didn't frame it, didn't show it to her knitting circle, didn't change anything about how she lived her life. But she did start paying a little more attention to the people using the library. Not paranoid attention, professional attention. The kind that comes from years of protecting people who never knew they needed protecting. The library board wanted to promote her, increase her salary, recognize her contribution. She declined. I'm exactly where I want to be, she told them. Doing exactly what I should be doing. Eleanor Price continues working at Rockbridge County Library, helping patrons find books, hosting the knitting circle, and maintaining the quiet routine she chose after decades of classified service. The difference now is subtle. A few more people in town know who she really is. Veterans recognize a fellow professional. Intelligence community retirees occasionally stop by to say hello, share a coffee, and talk about the missions that matter even when they're invisible. But mostly, Elena remains what she always was, a librarian who loves books, serves her community, and occasionally prevents foreign intelligence operations from compromising national security. Because some skills don't retire. They just find new applications. And sometimes the most dangerous people in a small town aren't the ones you'd expect. They're the ones shelving mysteries in the local library, watching, analyzing, and protecting people who never know they need protection. Have you ever realized someone working a quiet job had experience that made them uniquely qualified to spot dangers no one else noticed? Share their story in the comments, because expertise doesn't disappear with retirement. It just becomes invisible until it's needed. If this story reminded you that professionals never really stop serving, subscribe to Life Stories Archive. Every quiet guardian deserves recognition for staying vigilant long after retirement.